Welcome to Thread Hub. Let's get started with today's story. 15 years of marriage had convinced me I knew Megan better than anybody alive. Apparently, confidence is just stupidity wearing a decent jacket. So when she called me that Tuesday afternoon and asked me to meet her for dinner instead of coming straight home, I didn't immediately panic. "Just the two of us," she said. Something in her voice sounded strange, but I assumed she wanted to discuss Chloe's upcoming birthday, trouble at school, or one of the other small disasters parents are expected to solve before dessert. I reached the restaurant a few minutes early. Megan was already sitting there. That alone should have come with warning sirens. She was late to almost everything. Birthdays, appointments, dinner reservations, time was more of a friendly suggestion to her. She sat at a table in the corner, staring into a glass of water like it had personally betrayed her. There was no smile when I approached. No hello. Not even the usual meaningless chatter people use while pretending everything is fine. The second I sat down, I knew something was seriously wrong. "You look like you're waiting for someone to identify a body," I said. She managed a thin, shaky smile. "This is serious." The waiter appeared, took our orders, and walked away. Our meals came shortly afterward, but Megan barely touched hers. She kept glancing around the restaurant as though she was searching for the nearest emergency exit. I placed both hands on the table. "Okay. What's happening?" For several seconds, she stared at the tablecloth. Then she finally raised her head. Her eyes were red. "Daniel, I have to tell you something about our daughter." That got my full attention. "What about Chloe?" Megan swallowed. "What I'm about to tell you is going to hurt." I leaned back. "Then stop circling it and say it." She drew in a long breath. "Chloe isn't your biological daughter." The sounds around us seemed to shut off. Plates clattered, people talked, music played somewhere overhead, but it all became distant noise. I stared at her without speaking. She rushed ahead before I had the chance. 15 years ago, during the first year of our marriage, I made a terrible mistake. I started seeing someone I knew before you. His name is Ryan. I didn't interrupt. He came back into my life for a little while. Then I found out I was pregnant. I was never completely certain which one of you was Chloe's father. I kept looking at her. And you decided tonight was the perfect time to mention that because... She lowered her eyes. "Ryan contacted me online 6 months ago. At first, he said he only wanted to talk. Then he started asking for more. He said Chloe had the right to know who her real father was." Her fingers tightened around her napkin. "He told me that if I didn't tell you myself, he would. He's been threatening to destroy our family unless I did what he wanted." I studied her face. The words were emotional, but her delivery wasn't. She sounded polished. Prepared. Like she had practiced the whole speech in front of a mirror until every pause landed in the right place. That bothered me more than the confession. "So this guy disappears for 15 years, I said, then suddenly decides he wants to audition for Father of the Year?" Megan gave a small nod. The whole thing felt crooked. Before I could ask another question, her phone lit up beside her plate. Then it buzzed again. And again. My eyes dropped to the screen. Megan's hand darted toward it immediately. Way too fast. That was the moment my suspicion hardened into certainty. Whatever she was telling me, it wasn't the full story. Not even close. I looked at the phone. She looked at me. For 1 second, neither of us moved. Then she lunged for it. I was quicker. I snatched the phone and held it beyond her reach. "Daniel, give me that." "No." All the color drained from her face. And there it was. If Ryan had truly been threatening her, she should have wanted me to read those messages. She should have handed me the phone herself and said, "Look what this lunatic has been sending me." Instead, she looked terrified. I unlocked the screen. Megan pushed back her chair and stood. "Please don't do this." I ignored her. The newest conversation was already open. I expected to see threats, demands, maybe some dramatic nonsense about exposing the truth. What I found was worse. The latest message said, "Just keep your nerve. Once he believes Chloe isn't his, the rest will be easy." I read it twice. Then I scrolled upward. Every new message made this situation uglier. There were hotel confirmations, plans for weekend trips, and long conversations about the two of them living together. One message read, 15 years, and the idiot never noticed anything. Another said, "The best part is, he'll leave by himself. No custody battle. No mess." I slowly lowered the phone. Megan looked as though she was praying for the floor to split open and swallow her whole. "Ryan isn't blackmailing you," I said. Her lips parted, but no words came out. "You're having an affair with him, Daniel. And the story about Chloe isn't true. It's complicated." "No," I said. "It's actually embarrassingly simple." People at the nearby tables had begun watching us. I couldn't have cared less. Let them enjoy the show. At least somebody was getting their money's worth. I stared straight at her. "You wanted me to believe Chloe wasn't mine." Megan shook her head. "Daniel, please listen." I cut her off. So I would leave. Tears gathered in her eyes. "You don't understand." "I understand just fine." I raised the phone. "You planned this together." She slowly sank back into her chair, defeated. I kept scrolling. The messages became nastier. They mocked me, discussed my habits, and predicted exactly how I would react after hearing their lie. In their version of events, I would fall apart, quietly pack my things, move out, and eventually fade from Chloe's life. They had planned my emotional breakdown like they were writing a cheap television drama. What they hadn't planned was me getting hold of the script. I pulled my own phone from my pocket. Megan's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "Making sure I'm not the only one who remembers what happened tonight." I photographed everything I could find, the messages, the pictures, the hotel bookings, the plans, every ugly little piece of evidence. When I finished, I placed her phone back beside her plate. Megan looked at me desperately. "Please. Let me explain." I leaned back in my chair. "Go ahead." She paused. That tiny pause told me there was no explanation waiting in the wings. No innocent misunderstanding. No magical sentence that would make the whole rotten mess smell like roses. Finally, she whispered, "I made a mistake." I let out one short, humorless laugh. "No. Sleeping with Ryan was a mistake." I pointed toward her phone. This was strategy. Her gaze dropped to the table. I stood and reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. Then I pulled out a small digital recorder. The red indicator was still flashing. Megan's eyes widened. I gave her a slow nod. She stared at the recorder, and for the first time that evening, the fear on her face was real. "You recorded us?" Every word. Whatever color remained in her face disappeared. "Daniel, please. We need to discuss this somewhere private." "We just did." I picked up my jacket and reached for the check. She grabbed my wrist. For most of our marriage, that small gesture might have stopped me. I might have sat back down, listened to another speech, and tried to repair something she had already set on fire. Not that night. I calmly removed her hand. "You really need to stop making terrible decisions, Megan." Then I paid for my dinner and walked out. I didn't wait for her to follow. I didn't turn around. The second I climbed into my truck, I got to work. Not the next morning. Not after I had time to process my feelings. Feelings could stand in line. Evidence came first. I uploaded the recording to secure cloud storage. Then I emailed backup copies to myself. After that, I organized every photograph I had taken from Megan's phone and saved copies in separate folders. Proof first. Breakdown later. By the time I checked into a hotel, it was close to midnight. I spent the next 2 hours searching for family law attorneys. At 1:30 in the morning, I emailed 4 of them. I attached the audio recording, the screenshots, and a detailed account of everything that had happened at the restaurant. Then, somehow, I slept. At 7 the next morning, my phone rang. The caller was Nathan Caldwell, one of the attorneys I had contacted. "Mr. Mercer, I reviewed the material you sent." He paused. "If all of this is genuine, your wife may have placed herself in a very serious legal situation." That was enough for me. We arranged a meeting for later that morning. Nathan's office was downtown, on the 12th floor of a building designed to make nervous people feel even poorer. He listened to the entire recording and studied the screenshots himself. Then he leaned back in his chair. "Have you spoken to your daughter?" "No." "Good." He nodded once. "Don't say anything to her yet." Then he pushed a business card across the desk. It belonged to a DNA testing laboratory. I looked at him. "You think I need this?" "I think we eliminate every unanswered question before a judge has the chance to ask it." Hard to argue with that. Before I left, Nathan helped schedule the test. I paid extra for priority processing. I wanted the result in 72 hours. Not next week. Not whenever the laboratory felt spiritually prepared. Soon after that, Megan began calling. I watched the phone ring. Then she called again. And again. When I refused to answer, the messages started. Long apologies. Explanations that explained nothing. Promises from someone whose promises had apparently become decorative. I responded to none of them. That evening, Nathan called. I'd begun drafting the documents. For what? Emergency custody, assuming the DNA result confirms what we believe. I stared through the hotel window at the traffic below. Good. There was a brief silence. Then Nathan said, "What do you think is actually happening here?" I thought about Ryan. The affair. Their messages. The lie they had built around Chloe. Then I answered. I think they expected me to surrender. After the call ended, one thing became perfectly clear. Neither Megan nor Ryan understood who they were dealing with. I wasn't leaving. I wasn't fading out of my daughter's life because two selfish people had written a convenient little ending for me. All I needed now was proof. The DNA results arrived 3 days later. I was sitting in the hotel room when the email notification appeared. I opened the file immediately. It was only 1 page. And only one line truly mattered. Probability of paternity, 99. 99%. I stared at the number for several seconds. Not because it shocked me. Because it confirmed what I already knew in my bones. Chloe was my daughter. She had always been my daughter. Megan's confession at the restaurant had been fiction from beginning to end. I forwarded the report to Nathan. Less than 5 minutes later, he called. That's exactly what we needed. What happens next? Now we act. By noon, the custody documents had been filed. By late afternoon, Megan had been formally served. And that was when the situation took another ugly turn. Around 6 that evening, Nathan called again. His voice sounded different. We found something. What kind of something? A school administrator contacted our office after learning about the custody filing. I sat forward. Keep talking. Apparently, Ryan has been visiting Chloe's school. My entire body went rigid. What? He signed in twice during the past month. Both times, he identified himself as a family friend. My jaw tightened. What was he doing there? According to the staff, he attended one school function. He also introduced himself to one of Chloe's teachers as someone important in her life. Anger rose in my chest, hot and immediate, but I kept my voice controlled. Did he speak to Chloe? There's no indication that he did. That was the first decent news I had heard all day. Nathan continued. Technically, it doesn't appear that he broke any laws. But it may help us establish intent. Intent? That word changed everything. Ryan wasn't simply some old boyfriend who had wandered back into Megan's life looking for closure. He had already begun inserting himself into my daughter's world. Ryan had already started working his way into my daughter's life before I even knew the man existed. The next morning, Megan came to the hotel. I spotted her through the lobby windows and walked outside to meet her. She looked exhausted, like sleep had taken one look at the situation and decided not to get involved. Daniel, please. What? Her eyes filled with tears. You filed for custody? Yes. You didn't even speak to me first. I nearly laughed. You and Ryan planned to convince me Chloe wasn't my daughter. That isn't what happened. I stepped closer. Then tell me exactly what happened. She couldn't. Because the truth sounded even uglier when spoken aloud. I never meant for it to go this far, she finally whispered. I nodded. But it did. Then I handed her a copy of the DNA report. She looked down at it. The blood drained from her face. For several seconds, she didn't say anything. Then she slowly raised her eyes to mine. You already knew. No, I said. Now I know. I turned and headed back toward the hotel entrance. Behind me, Megan called my name. I kept walking. A few hours later, Nathan contacted me again. The judge had agreed to consider our emergency custody petition. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. For the first time since that dinner, Megan was no longer directing the story. She was scrambling to keep up with mine. The emergency hearing took place 8 days later. Megan arrived with an attorney. Ryan came with her. It was the first time I had ever seen him in person. 15 years of marriage had nearly been destroyed because of this man, and honestly, I expected something more impressive. He wasn't physically small. He just seemed small. The kind of guy who sounded powerful only when everyone else stayed quiet. Judge Helena Price entered the courtroom and wasted no time. Nathan stood first. He laid out the timeline calmly and methodically. No grand speeches. No theatrical outrage. Just dates, messages, recordings, and facts, the 4 natural enemies of a liar. The audio from the restaurant was played. The courtroom went silent. Megan sat perfectly still. Ryan stared down at the table. Then Nathan submitted printed copies of their messages. Judge Price read through them for several minutes. Her expression became harder with each page. Finally, she looked up. Mrs. Megan Mercer, do you dispute the authenticity of these messages? Megan's attorney leaned over and whispered something to her. After a brief conversation, he stood. No, Your Honor. The judge nodded. Then she looked directly at Megan. You deliberately told your husband that the child he had raised for 15 years might not be biologically his. Megan swallowed. Yes. And when you made that statement, you had no evidence that it was true? Her voice was barely loud enough to hear. No. Judge Price narrowed her eyes. So you intentionally attempted to make a father doubt his relationship with his own daughter? Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. The silence did the job just fine. Then the judge turned toward Ryan. Mr. Ryan Cole, these communications indicate that you expected Mr. Mercer to leave his daughter's life voluntarily. Ryan shifted in his seat. That isn't what I meant. Judge Price lifted one of the printed messages. It appears to be precisely what you meant. Even Ryan's attorney had nothing useful to add. The atmosphere in the courtroom had completely changed. Megan was no longer trying to defend her behavior. She was trying to survive the consequences. Then the ruling came. Judge Price folded her hands in front of her. Based on the evidence presented today, I have serious concerns regarding deliberate manipulation directed at both Mr. Mercer and the minor child. She paused. I am granting temporary primary custody to Mr. Daniel Mercer. Megan's eyes immediately filled with tears. The judge continued. Mrs. Mercer will be permitted supervised visitation while this matter undergoes further evaluation. Then she looked at Ryan. Mr. Cole is prohibited from having any contact with the minor child until this court orders otherwise. Ryan looked shocked. I wasn't. Their own messages had made the argument for us. As the hearing ended, Megan turned toward me. Daniel, please. I met her eyes. For a second, she looked exactly as she had in the restaurant. The only difference was that, back then, she believed she controlled every card in the deck. Now she knew the deck had been taken away. What none of us understood yet was that an even bigger problem was already building. Chloe had started asking questions. And she was about to hear far more than anyone had planned to tell her. A few days after the hearing, she stopped me in the kitchen before school. She was 15. Old enough to recognize when adults were lying badly and calling it protection. Dad, what's actually going on? I looked at her. What do you mean? She crossed her arms. I mean, Mom is hardly around. You're meeting with lawyers. People at school are acting strange. She wasn't a little girl anymore. I knew I couldn't keep dodging the truth. I chose my words carefully. Your mother made several decisions that hurt a lot of people. Chloe watched me closely. Did she cheat on you? The question was so blunt I almost smiled. There was no point insulting her intelligence. Yes, I said. Her expression hardened immediately. That reaction told me she had already suspected as much. What else? I hesitated. Not because I didn't know the answer. Because some sentences change a family the moment they leave your mouth. Your mother tried to convince me that I wasn't your biological father. Chloe blinked. Then she blinked again. What? It wasn't true. She stared at me, completely stunned. Why would she do that? I shook my head. That's something you'll need to ask her. 2 days later, she did. I wasn't present for the conversation, but I heard about it afterward. Megan called me that evening. For the first time in weeks, I answered. Chloe hates me. Her voice trembled. What happened? I tried to explain everything. And? She said she couldn't understand how a mother could do something like that. I said nothing. Megan began crying. She wouldn't even look at me. I had no interest in comforting her. Actions came with consequences. Megan was simply discovering that consequences rarely arrived carrying flowers. Meanwhile, Ryan's life was collapsing right alongside hers. His wife learned about the affair through the court documents. Within a week, she filed for divorce. Then his employer heard about the case. Apparently, becoming publicly involved in a custody dispute built on adultery, manipulation, and a fake paternity story wasn't exactly the kind of achievement companies liked featuring in employee newsletters. Funny how that worked. The most predictable surprise came several weeks later. Megan repeatedly tried contacting Ryan. He stopped answering her calls. The same man who had promised her a beautiful new life vanished the moment that life became inconvenient. Exactly the kind of brave, dependable man I had expected him to be. While their little fantasy burned to the ground, I stayed focused on Chloe. Therapy. School. Routine. Stability. Every decision I made came down to one simple question. What was best for my daughter? Then, 1 week before the final custody hearing, Nathan called me. Something happened today. What? He sounded almost amused. Chloe requested a private meeting with Judge Price. I sat quietly for a moment. What does she want to tell her? Nathan gave a short laugh. No one knows. For the first time in months, even I had no idea what was coming next. The final custody hearing took place 6 weeks later. By then, most of the destruction had already happened. Megan's relationship with Chloe was barely holding together. Ryan had completely disappeared. And Chloe had made it painfully clear that she was finished being treated like some clueless child who couldn't understand what the adults around her had done. Before the hearing officially started, Judge Price met with her privately. Nobody else was permitted inside. Not me. Not Megan. Not even the attorneys. Just the judge and Chloe. Their conversation lasted almost 30 minutes. When Chloe finally stepped out of the room, she looked calm and certain, as though she had said exactly what she came there to say and had no intention of apologizing for it. The hearing began shortly afterward. Nathan submitted the final reports from Chloe's therapist, her school counselor, and the court-appointed custody evaluator. Every report pointed in the same direction. Chloe felt safe with me. She trusted me. She wanted consistency. Most importantly, she wanted to keep living with me. Then Judge Price spoke. I had the opportunity to meet privately with Chloe this morning. The courtroom became completely silent. The judge turned toward Megan. Your daughter is an intelligent and remarkably perceptive young woman. Megan lowered her eyes. Judge Price continued. She expressed profound disappointment regarding the choices that brought this family before the court. Megan's shoulders sank. Then the judge looked at me. She also made one point absolutely clear. I waited. The judge glanced briefly at her notes. Daniel is my father. Nothing anyone says or does will ever change that. For the first time that day, something broke through the wall I had built around myself. It wasn't relief. It wasn't triumph. It was something deeper. Validation. Because that was all I had wanted from the beginning. Not revenge. Not punishment. The truth. Judge Price reviewed her documents one final time. Then she delivered her ruling. Full custody was awarded to me. Megan's visits would remain supervised for the foreseeable future. Any future change would depend on her ability to rebuild trust with Chloe. The family home would remain with me so Chloe could continue living in familiar surroundings and maintain as much stability as possible. And just like that, the case was over. Outside the courthouse, Megan approached me. She looked worn down. Months of lies, hearings, lawyers, and consequences had finally caught up with her. Daniel? I stopped. She inhaled slowly. I never imagined things would end this way. I studied her for a moment. Neither did I. Then I walked toward my truck. Chloe was already waiting in the passenger seat. When I climbed behind the wheel, she looked over at me. Are we finished? I started the engine. Yeah. She smiled. Good. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled too. But the real ending came 1 year later. 12 months after that dinner, our lives looked completely different. They weren't perfect. Perfect is usually just a word people use before something expensive breaks. But our lives were honest. And honesty was more than enough. Chloe and I developed a comfortable routine. We ate dinner together most evenings. I rearranged my work schedule so I could spend more time at home. We both continued therapy for a while. Not because we were falling apart, but because surviving something didn't automatically mean you understood it. Sometimes you had to check the foundation after the storm, even when the house was still standing. Slowly, our home stopped feeling like the place where everything had gone wrong. It became ours again. One Friday evening, I sat inside the auditorium at Chloe's high school. She was participating in a debate competition. The same girl who had once been trapped in the middle of adult lies now stood confidently beneath the stage lights, speaking to hundreds of people without hesitation. I watched from the audience, proud enough to be annoying about it. When the competition ended, students and parents poured into the hallway. A few minutes later, Chloe spotted me. She walked over with her folder tucked beneath one arm. "Well," she asked. "You destroyed them." She laughed. "I knew you'd say that." "Because it's true." We headed toward the parking lot together. Halfway there, she suddenly stopped. "Dad?" "Yeah?" She looked at me for several seconds. Then she said something I would remember for the rest of my life. "You never gave up on me." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything we had survived. I nodded. That was never an option. Chloe smiled and wrapped her arms around me. For a while, neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to explain. Across town, Megan was living alone in a small apartment. Her supervised visits had eventually become unsupervised, but the relationship she once had with Chloe remained damaged. Trust could take years to build and only a few reckless minutes to destroy. Megan had learned that lesson in the least pleasant way possible. As for Ryan, I heard that he moved to another state after his divorce. I never saw him again. I never wanted to. Some people leave your life and accidentally do you a favor. That evening, Chloe and I stopped for burgers on the way home. Nothing elegant. No reservations. No linen tablecloths. No dramatic confessions served beside untouched food. Just a completely ordinary evening. The kind I once took for granted. I sat across from my daughter while she talked about school, her friends, and everything she wanted to do in the future. And for a moment, I thought back to that restaurant. The affair. The lies. The manipulation. The carefully designed plan to make me abandon my own daughter. Megan and Ryan had believed they controlled the story. They thought they could choose my reaction, write my exit, and decide how everything ended. They were wrong. Because the moment the truth came into the light, their entire plan collapsed. And in the end, the one thing they had tried hardest to destroy became the one thing they could never reach. The bond between a father and his daughter. Thank you for watching.